All right, welcome to the show, everybody. My name is Mike McKay. I'm your host, and today I'm joined by Joe Flood. Joe is the founder and the creative energy behind a company called N2 Comms. Welcome to the show, Joe.
Thanks, Mike. Pleasure to be here.
Yeah, I'm happy to have you on. We had a little bit of chat ahead of time, and we talked about your model being super interesting to the people that we're listening to, and so we're going to dig into that a little bit today. But first, tell us a little bit about you. Where were you born? Where do you come from? How did you get here?
Starting full genesis here, starting at the beginning. So I guess I was born in Newton, Massachusetts, where my dad was a cop.
Cool.
Tough town to afford on a cop's salary. So we were out deeper into the Massachusetts towards Providence, Rhode Island suburbs, from where I grew up mostly. And I came to N2. I was always a reporter. That was kind of a writer, but really mostly specifically a reporter. And I started N2. I was also a freelancer primarily. That's an important factor in this. And I think what we've sort of all seen in the journalism world over the last 5 or 10 years in particular. Freelancers saw a little earlier. So I started N2 in 2015, so I guess it'd be 11 years ago, and had been, sort of working around the edges of what became N2 for another year or two before that, because you pretty quickly started to see what was happening to journalism's sort of monetization problem, because the freelance budgets dried up. Staffers, they continued on to a greater extent for a while, but the freelance budgets really dried up. And, not only just the amount of work out there, but also the sort of nature of it, the kind of stuff I did, which is like long pieces, investigative work, data journalism, outside of the sort of, there was a little data journalism boom for a little while there. But again, all staffers for the most part, but you started to see the writing on the wall a little clearer and a little earlier if you were in the freelance world. And so I had started doing the kind of work that I really liked, long form work, stuff involving data and technology, but not as sort of the only thing going on in this story, but as sort of like key features along with sort of characters and sort of historical, political context, all these sorts of things. I just couldn't do that stuff. Or you could, but you'd work 6 months on an investigative piece and they'd pay $1,000 or something like that. And so, but what we found was that, the thing that really was killing a lot of journalism was social media. And the flip side of that was that you had companies now had access to a publishing platform. And so, that goes in a lot of different directions, but the end that I was, the most interested in was that you started to have companies publishing a lot more white papers and things that were, a little less that sort of technical work, which was really fun because actually, sort of like grad school-ish, that's, this is true of a lot of reporters, but you're mostly curious. I should say reporters and not journalists. I was never a quote unquote journalist, which I usually think of as being the jobs that aren't reporters in the industry. That's the other thing. We've moved further and further away from fact gatherers to opiners. The idea of being, it used to be you'd sort of get put out to stud, you'd end up in the editorial pages after 30 years of investigative reporting, and all this. Now you can sit in your bathrobe and come up with ideas. And then it became a thing that 20-year-olds are doing. So the world changed. But what happened was some of that stuff migrated to corporate side. And that was where I just started pursuing that. I had the chance, mostly because of connections. An old friend of mine, we'd been reporters together at the newspaper in college. He became a Marine. And then it was Marines, Harvard Business School, and founded a data science company, co-founded a data science company. And I started writing for him. He was on the business development side. Another guy is Army Intel guy who was on the sort of data science engineering, he ran that team. And I got to be sort of the go-between. One guy would sell a project to a client. The other guy would be in charge of implementing on it. Of course, engineers want to do engineer things. So my job was to sort of keep them honest and be okay, remember, I have to write this report at the end of this thing.
Somebody's got to translate it into regular English.
Right. And
Yeah.
you really, at that point too, though, you're in the architecture of the study, because is what the engineers want to study, what the correlations the mathematicians want to look for, is that helpful to the client? Is that actually going to cut the risk of this cybersecurity problem or sort of like insider threat or whatever it is? And so we got to like get in there and do that. So it was a little bit like being an investigative reporter, and then I'd write up the reports.
Okay.
And so I started doing more and more of that stuff, and I got to, there was a brief moment, very brief moment. I was at this sweet spot where I basically could like fund my living in South Dakota and my reporting from wherever, by this job that would, by like halftime plus type work, you know.
Yep.
And then very quickly, and that was sort of the dream job. I could write what I wanted to, not have to deal with the economic pressures of it. If somebody wanted to pay me hardly anything for it, but it was a really important story, then I would do it. And then I started running a company accidentally. And so my job became to.
What do you mean accidentally?
Well, you just sort of, I mean, it varies. I never had any ambitions to be, to have a title or a business. I don't have business cards, actually.
Yeah. Funny enough, neither do I.
Yeah, I just, like LinkedIn, baby. It's already there. Like, it saves a step. Like, we're going to do it. Let's do it. Yeah, I just decided, that was not a thing I was interested in. I didn't have a problem with it. I mostly love a steep learning curve. It was a kind of challenge I'd never had before. As it turns out, actually, I'd had a lot of experiences that were good prep. I'd been a teacher in extremely poor school systems, which I think is the best preparation possible for being like a founder.
Yeah.
Because it's utter madness. You have to be an adult in the room all the time, because literally you're the only one. Everyone else is, and I was also a coach and a bus driver, and so it became this like, you have to be able to solve every single problem yourself. You have to create a little cult of personality to convince the kids that they do want to read something, or that they would like to go run for 40 minutes straight today, or whatever the thing is. So then, and we
like a business.
Yeah, it really is. And then we got very lucky not too long after we'd started, I had a client, and they wanted to outsource a much larger. I was a piece of a larger, mostly full-time in-house publishing operation, basically. Just putting out a lot of material on very regular patterns to, expensive customers, these kinds of, in this sort of realm. And so very much like a newspaper. And so then they decided actually, we're probably better off with a lot of newspaper people. And this part-time structure seems to work well. You don't get burned out. You get to, yada, yada, yada. Their thing was they'd hire someone good and they'd leave after 6 months because they got a fellowship, or they got
sure.
Bloomberg was oh, okay, well, we'll give you a new job. We'll bump you up a step, they'd lose a lot of people. And so it was a really nice, sort of structure. So we just dumb lucked into that. I mean, we worked hard to, set ourselves up to the, but getting a good sized client as your sort of base of operations was huge, because we were never anything but a bootstrap company. We, me and my partner put, I think we put $2,000 each into a bank account or something like that. And then, did incorporation papers, and then we got paid. Some of our first sizable gigs where we had to pay people. We said, listen, maybe this isn't normal, but we're not Bain Consulting. We don't have any liquidity. Right. We're building this thing. We're gonna have to make payroll for 5 people now can you front us the first 2 months pay or something like that? And we just sort of went from there. And that was the biggest lucky break, was that we had enough size very early to have a core team that wasn't starving or and none of us had money behind us. I think that's the thing. A lot of people have the ability to, it is always funny when I see people I had I had like $5,000 in my bank account. And I'm like, I knew you in college. You were definitely living in an apartment your parents bought you. Like, it's cool that you were down to that. That was probably the most economically stressed you'd ever been. But like, none of us had any money behind us. That's the whole point. Journalism had gotten to be a fancy person's world, where you had money from some other source that wasn't your own earnings.
Sure.
And that wasn't us. So we really had to bootstrap it, but fortunately clients understood it, and we got to a little bit of a critical mass early that we were able to sort of grow and build. And so, at our core, I feel like I really buried the lead here. We are we're a full service creative agency. We tell stories, and that's it. But we do that in every facet of life. Initially, this was a very sort of academics, data journalists, kind of the wonkiest sort of, end of storytelling, policy people, stuff like that. Now that's expanded, but I still think at our core, that's really what we are. And most of our clients are in that space. We do mostly B2B type communications, relatively technical stuff, some technical writing, but less on the, especially like in the software world, like FAQs and things like that, and like some technical debt documentation, a bit of that. But it's usually not the experts speaking to the experts. It's the experts speaking to a very sophisticated, on the edge of this thing. So like we do a lot of LP communications, a lot of investors venture capital funds, private equity funds, hedge funds. And so that's a really, that's a good example. These are extremely smart people that are invested in these places as a general rule. But, now you've got someone who spent like 15 years studying, foreign exchange trades. And like now we have to translate that into a take on what this happening in this currency means to that other currency, which affects, sort of treasury rates or something like that, all these different kind of variables. And that's really where we, the core of where we live is taking really technical people's stories and making them compelling and interesting and sort of relevant and factual to a broader audience of investors, consumers, even in the world of like tech sales, which we do a lot of, like, or SaaS. Even there, it's not necessarily the chief technical officer who's writing the check or signing off on it, or we do like RFP responses, for big projects. Often there's a public-private component to it. You might have a document that's written by 10 engineers in 4 different countries and yada, yada, yada. But it's maybe a government bureaucrat who's actually only been in the planning commission for a year. You know what I mean? Like that's reading it and approving it. So that translation is really at the core of what we do. And sort of old school journalistic diligence, fact checking, down to like, I think, editing, copy editing, things like that I think are extremely important. I think, in the realm of things, the copy editors are not that expensive as a, really high knowledge provider. And as I say, like, if you don't order a prime rib at a nice restaurant and they sling it out on some styrofoam. Like, it's just get the plates, present it at a high level. Why are you skimping on something when you're bidding on $1 billion contract? Why would you not spend an extra, $5,000 to have some people work on the weekends and do the fact checking and do the, and do the copy editing so that we know everything is buttoned up. There isn't some minor mistakes. Kind of like insurance in some ways. You can see it as a cost center, or you can as a sort of tail risk prevention play. But we're sort of involved in all that stuff, and we're very a la carte. We have no people that are from sort of agency backgrounds and stuff like that, but we knew nothing coming in, which was.
How did you like? A lot of people are going to say, well, and you said you get lucky if you're a big customer, but one of the realities of the world is luck is preparation meets opportunity, right? Like. What would you say
Bill Parcells coaching the Patriots? You are your record. There is no luck.
Yeah.
You're as good as your record says you are.
Right. So some of the people listening to this will be like, oh, I could never do that. Never land a big customer early. What would you say about that? Like, what did you guys actually do? Were they One of the things I see people missing all the time is there's money laying around in front of them and they just don't ask, oh, I know that person, so I shouldn't offer them what I do, right? And shit like that. So, how did you guys land the big thing that's like there's just no fear going into it? Was it the bank account says $1.17, we better do something? Like how did that come about for you guys?
In this situation, I'd say and you're absolutely right. There's sort of like the preparation and like, kind of opportunism, being willing to sort of,
Yeah.
like whatever that is. I think the big thing with us was we were lucky in the sense that like it was a unique like skill set fit mismatch, economic inefficiency, like kind of a thing. And we kind of got lucky that the way that we would have solved the problem is exactly what the client wanted to do. They sort
Yeah.
of came to us with, we sort of, I had my ideas about how I would solve it just because I was involved in the ecosystem. And they came and said, hey, what about this? And it was kind of a novel structure. And we said, like, and I said, like, yep, that is exactly how I would do it. You should, and like you should outsource this to us. I mean, like you tell me what you want.
That's magic. That is
I'll
the
just keep
magic
working
phrase.
for you, as you run
Yeah.
it. But like, I think this is this just isn't a core. This is not what your company does, and there's no world in which your company wants to do more of this. It's just
Yeah.
like why in-house your security? Like
Right.
like why would a law firm in-house the security function? Well, because like they're hiring paralegals who might want to be a security guard. Like this doesn't it just doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
There's no future here. There's no movement. And so
I mean,
with that we
I
were
think
lucky. But
that clarity of what you do, like what you just said, is super interesting because there's the Picasso problem, right? The
explain.
story the story about him being asked on, can you draw my caricature, and it's 30 grand, and you're not paying for the 10 minutes it took me to do it. You're paying for the 30 years it took me to learn how to do it in 10 minutes.
Yes.
And I mean, do you see some of your clients in the world of, well, what you just said, well, we can just bring it in and do it ourselves. Like, how do you get around that? Or do you just
Sure. I
tell them,
mean,
hey, that's dumb. That's a dumb idea. Just let us do it for you, which I
well, I
tend to
think
do with some of our clients.
yeah, I mean, depending on how good your rapport is, right? There's
Yeah.
like you could but I think my thing is I like to really define terms and
Okay.
roles and responsibilities and goals. And so
Okay.
to like that is and I think that's the process I like to start with. Okay, great. You want to, like explain why. And if it's
Okay.
like we want to improve, in-house capabilities, I say, okay, great. What's the goal of improving those in-house capabilities? Like, what's the thing? Is it just for this thing you just want to be competent at, or you have an expansion play that involves X and Y and Z, or you want to do this, you want to do that? Really define those terms, and then also roles and responsibilities. One of the things that I think about is that I like to think about professional services in general. I think
Yep.
that we all know that very few companies do most of their own in-house legal work. House counsel
Even if
does
you
advise.
even if you have a house counsel, their main job is to outsource their legal work. Like,
That's exactly it. A
right?
company of
Like,
size, house counsel is not doing a lot of lawyering. They are a manager of lawyers on retainer.
yep.
Creative director at for a company is not Don Draper, right? It is the person who is in charge of running all of the they're in charge of hiring Don Draper for the advertising. They're in charge
Yep.
of the branding agency, the research firm. They do, it's all these sorts of things. And so that's one thing we like to think about. Counting certainly works that way in a lot of cases. You at the very minimum, you have an outside auditor, right? And our thing is that like certain wonky professional services are just best outsourced to some degree, and we think of ourselves like that. And you could think of us as like sort of a blue collar version of that, which is like the people running the cafeteria or the security guards, or it can be the IT consultants, the cybersecurity
Yep.
firm, or you could think of it as lawyers, accountants, management consultants. But I think that's one. The other thing that's really important, and I think this is something that gets lost in business in general, is the distinction between ops and everything else.
Say more about that.
Well, I think that there are certain jobs that if they are not done immediately in sequence, it gums up everything. Like these processes get, it is I think of the old, really showing age here. I Love Lucy, which was on, was probably it was on reruns when I was
a chocolate episode.
Exactly right. And so, for the listener, right? It's like Lucy's on the chocolate factory conveyor belt. Chocolate goes into the boxes, something goes wrong, and then eventually everything goes haywire, and she's just cramming chocolates in her mouth, and the whole thing gets messed up. And I think so these are scalable mistakes. In other words, like when an ops job is a mistake made is not a discrete mistake that lives in a bubble. It has these sort of, rock rolling down a hill avalanche problems that spread and grow, and they get in the way of core functions. Usually with me, it's the newsletter, the very important daily newsletter doesn't go out the door. A deadline for an application isn't hit. With something like that, there's the wrong version, of the wrong edits of a podcast to go out, whatever it is. And I think those jobs are really fundamentally different from most other jobs. The people you think about, like an investment firm, the people who come up with the idea to make a trade are usually not the people in charge of the execution algorithms that make the trade as efficiently as possible. Those are different jobs. And I think that making sure everyone's really clear on those distinctions is always really important. And if the client wants to do it, the client wants to do it. They're the boss. I just want to make sure that they know what they're getting into and what their upside is on it. And, sometimes you do have these situations where you do an exercise and you realize that maybe they're picking up pennies in front of a steamroller. They're hoping we can save, or sometimes it's actually, they're not even saving pennies. I find this to be true of big companies. It's hard for me to understand because I run my own business, but they're not in charge of the P&L, or a full-time employee isn't on their L, but a contractor is. And from a business perspective, that's weird. Now you have people with the wrong incentives internally. They should worry about the company bottom line, not like their fiefdom. But I just like to get into sort of fact-finding missions. What are the goals? What are the stakes? And then it's up to the client.
And that's unique to the U.S. actually. Like it's only in the U.S. are you allowed to take restructuring fees below the line. In Europe, it hits the P&L, and so people are like, Europe, they're freaking lazy. They let people work that don't have jobs. Well, their accounting system says if you spend it, you spend it. You don't get to say, I didn't spend it. And, by the way, over here, I spent it, right? So.
Wow. Okay, so that sort of off balance sheet-y element of where your things go. Fascinating. I had no idea. That's so helpful.
Yep. It's one of the reasons that U.S. business makes all these throwaway decisions. But I want to go back to something, especially for people that are listening to this. The process, right? If you're a remodeling company, your job is to pound nails and build stuff. Your job probably isn't to hire people. I mean, the activity of hiring has to happen so that your business operates. But if you're focused on becoming expert at hiring, first of all, it's one of the things that we know takes a long time to learn how to be fluent and, really good at hiring. Copywriting. You can write your own stuff, but it takes a long time to create expertise. And, let's not even talk about AI. One of my clients sent me this. They're like, hey, I'm going to send this out. I'm like, it's wrong. Like, it's factually inaccurate. What are you doing, right? But if your job is to build, then your operations process needs to be every step of the build. If you're remodeling, and most of our people are in the construction trades or manufacturing, one of your biggest issues is your schedule. Well, one of the reasons your schedule gets effed up is that you start, I'm started, well, now I'm going to go look at hiring. Now I'm going to go look at a book. Oh, now I'm going to go write something. Now I'm going to go, right? So the way that you described it is perfectly clear to me, but if you're swinging a hammer today, what you should hear is anything you're doing that's not swinging a hammer is more than likely costing you money and more than it needs to be if you're trying to do it yourself. Now, if you're bootstrapping, a lot of times you have to do it and figure those pieces out, but I think that's it is super interesting. That concept of the problem scale is exactly what people see in the day-to-day world of running businesses.
Yeah, I mean, that's, and I think about this, like you're talking about, in the sort of construction and contracting industry. And this is not, like I mostly built my own house. This is my pandemic project. We had certainly some skilled welders and, people like that had to do stuff, but I don't mess with electrical, even when I mostly know what I'm doing. I made it a rule. I'm just to tail risk. I'm not going to mess with it.
Plumbing. I don't do plumbing.
There we go. Yeah, exactly. Plumbing, I'm okay. I'll mess around with a little bit, usually with some guidance, but like, so this was interesting doing that. And I actually felt like it was surprisingly similar. Figuring out how to build my own house was not that different from figuring out how to build my own company, was not that different from learning how to be a teacher, coach, etc. And I think you're right. It's exactly that. It is focus on what you do well, and, like, know that there are ways to outsource or have somebody else do these things that are quite useful. I mean, like there's a certain point where, do you hire a bookkeeper or do you just have an outsourced, a part-time, whatever it is, like these different areas. And I think these transitions are really important too. I think about, like, I know guys who were, for a long time, they had a specific craft and they became a GC, which is just a fundamentally different thing. Like, you're working in the same building. Yeah, but a GC is, trades, you're an operator. You're getting in there and you're doing the thing and you have your specialty and it's in coordination with others, but you're doing your thing. The GC is more like the CEO in that way. You have to think about people from 4 or 5 different groups. You've got to coordinate them. You're sort of scheduling operators. And that there is no sense, if you got framing problems, do not schedule the drywallers. Like, this is going to be, it's these sorts of, and I think that those things are, and that's so fascinating. And those transitions are big. Some people want to, and they need to make those transitions, but I think it's important to know the difference or why you're doing it and understand those stakes. It's the old, like, the joke in The Office, right? Like, Michael Scott is so good as a salesman, they make him a manager of salesmen, which he's terrible at.
Disaster. True story. The best sales manager that I've ever coached and it was a big company, right? Like, I had a 22-person sales team. He was a project engineer, and the company was basically desperate to throw somebody in the sales manager role. And the guy had worked for one of the other guys I coached. I'm like, hey, go get Chris. They're like, Chris never sold anything. I'm like, no shit. Like, just trust, like, get Chris. So Chris goes in. He doesn't know anything about selling, but you know what he knows? Processes. So he got a week of pushback from his top sales guys saying, you don't know sales and blah. He's like, I don't give a shit. Record what you do. Let's talk about it. Document it. And I'm going to teach everybody to do it the way that you do it. They're like, oh, that won't work and blah, blah, blah. He's like, hey, man, I'm an engineer. You're a salesperson. Let's just put 2 weeks into this. And at the end of the 2 weeks, the sales guys that document, the top 3 guys are like, oh, this is how we do it. And he's like, great, I'm going to start teaching people that. He got his 22 guys on quota for the first time in 5 years. He was an engineer. The freaking sales guy, finally after about a month, the top sales guy's like, oh, it's such a gift. I can just go sell. I don't have to worry about these other yahoos. The last guy was trying to get me to train them, and the freaking guy was just a great salesperson. But the engineer, selling is a process. And the guy was super smart and focused on next step, scalable mistakes. Yep, right? Exactly. If you don't start your meeting right, the meeting's going to go off the rails. So what's the next step? And what's the next step in their process was they ended up with like a 7-step sales process based on all the stuff that they had to do. So it's super interesting. Like, I think about copyright when I first talked to you, reporter, investigative journalist, copywriting, of course. You're building the blocks of expertise to get where you're at. So
yeah, that's just it. And that's like, and I was, and I think that was something I kind of got from my family, who were mostly, like, dad was a cop, uncle was a firefighter / contractor. A lot of my grandfather and a lot of my uncles were landscapers. Sure. And so I just grew up doing all this stuff, like, tagging along and doing these things. And I think you do that, like, understanding that you need this, that there's 20 things that have to happen today. A couple of them can be out of order, but these are the ones that can't be out of order.
Sure.
As like you start to understand that at a young age and really like see how that sort of functions. And you're right, like engineers are phenomenal at process.
Oh, it's crazy.
Like
I mean,
documentation, like having all these things, like there's a really good, but although there's different kinds of engineers and different type, like
oh, yeah.
I know some engineers that are rough draft guys, you know what I mean? That like, and then there's others are like technical documented, like they're the ones you'd like, they've already archived everything for all the things are going to go wrong in a technical debt standpoint in 2 years. But those distinctions between and that process stuff is so important. And that's what I like in general is like across different fields. I live in South Dakota. I'm in New York a lot. I'm in San Francisco a lot. All different jobs, different geographical locations, rural, city. I think like there's the obvious divides we're so aware of in America and around the world right now. I think they're real, but I think they're really overblown. And when you get people working and you start to realize, oh, I'm not the only person with a complicated job in the world. It turns out.
Or a dog, or a sick kid, or trying to get people to to school who's driving the car today. So, yeah, it's on a face-to-face level. I mean, there's still a hell of a lot more commonality. So, hey, on your business, what's your biggest challenge been as a leader, owner, creator? How have you overcome it?
I mean, our biggest challenge always is like, sales, like beginning of the sales funnel in particular. Like this was never a, it's weird. We spend a lot of time, we do a lot of like content marketing. It's weird doing it ourselves. I hired people to do it for us. I took my own medicine. Eventually I was like, I should be able to write my own website copy. It turns out, obviously I can't because I'm not. Like if I need to take my own advice here, and like
I run a coaching company and I have 2 people coaching me on running my company. Like, but you're in the weeds. If you're the CEO and the owner, you're the person that's got to make also all the decisions about hiring and what's budget look like, what's our target market, what are we actually doing, what's our purpose, who are we attracting, culture, all those kind of things that can't be outsourced.
There's a million things you've got to do.
Yeah. That's interesting.
And I think it's nice to have, some people don't want people that push back. Some executives don't want that. I very much like that. When I at times really people are, why do you keep on saying, does that make sense? I'm like, well, I'm trying to make sure it does. Like, it's very helpful. My partner, not my original founding partner, but the second guy who joined after that, who I've known since we were in like 5th grade. And I think it started with us like hurling insults at each other on a basketball court.
Sure.
I like having him in the meetings because people don't really believe you as a boss when you say like, I want feedback, I want criticism, I want to hear this. But then when they see a guy who's been making fun of you since you were 10 in the meeting, when someone like that pushes back, they say, "Oh, okay. Actually, you really do want this. All right. Well, this is good." But yes, you have so many of these decisions to make, and I mean that's certainly a thing as far as like work sites go. The colloquial term I believe would be ball busting. Leaving aside, but like I certainly grew up with that with my dad with cops, and I think I grew up in like locker rooms, like in high school and college and all this stuff, and so I think that's it. Those are different cultures than an office, but I think capturing some of that, the idea that like the lowest guy in the totem pole can make fun of the highest guy on it, and if it's funny, people laugh, and if you take that personally, it's a sign that you are weak. Yeah. That not that your strength doesn't come from like beating down on people. Strength comes from like mixing it up and showing every day why you're the boss, because you are the smartest, because you are the hardest working, not because you use a different bathroom on a higher floor or something like that. That element of like is a thing that like I've always tried to have in my organizations and things like that. Tech was really big on flat cultures until the top guys got really rich. And suddenly that was less of managerial prerogative because the really rich guys didn't want to, I'm teasing, it's only certain companies, but like, I think that artificial hierarchies and things like that, and needing to feel, almost like cloistered away from your own folks because you're worried that they'll make a good point and you might be seen as wrong is the opposite of every way I've ever tried to do anything. And I have seen construction crews that are like that, and those are the worst ones. They make the most mistakes. Is people who are scared of their bosses, and the bosses like live in an information bubble.
I mean, I'm gonna credit you, but I'm taking scalable mistakes. I'm going to use that because it's a perfect descriptor, right, of what people do to themselves. So I talked to 3 marketing companies last week, and I'm like, hey, what's your biggest challenge? And all of them said lead generation. I'm like, so you're a lead generator, because one of them is a guy that I've known for a while, and I have respect for him because he's the first guy that told me we don't really know how to do B2B marketing the way that you want it done. He's like, we can do B2C all day, every day, but so he was busting my balls about the fact that I paid 2 coaches. I mean, I've had as many as 5 coaches working on me over the years of owning my business. And he's like, well, why are you doing that? Isn't that what you do? Aren't you any good at it? I'm like, Steve, you just told me your top challenge is lead gen and you're a marketing company.
Right.
And he stops. Exactly. He's like, huh. I'm like, Kyle versus kids have no shoes, man. It's not like a human failing. It's not criticism. It's a critique. You're right. Their challenge is lead gen.
Yeah, I mean, you think I joke about like I joke this with clients before, like they have have a newsletter and they say, oh, I write my own newsletter. I'm like, that's great. You probably should get some publishing help. Like you just want to you want to write it and then hand it off to a copy editor, fact checker, publisher, gets it up everywhere, flawless, gets it out there. And I say like, I don't really need an editor. I just do it myself. And I say like, sure, Michael Lewis uses 2 or whatever on every book, but you, non-professional writer, you don't need one. Yeah, it's like. It's kind of crazy. Or like, if someone was trying to like train for you're going to train for out of nowhere was going to train for a marathon. They're like, and you're like, okay, cool. You should probably like read some books, get a trainer, get a coach. They're like, nah, I got this one. I'm like, you're right. Steph Curry needs 3 trainers before every basketball game, but you know so much more about this than Steph Curry that you don't need it.
Yeah.
And I think that's the thing. And it's because it's that sort of it's the unknown, that you don't even know what you don't know.
Right.
Like your next step is to know what you don't know and then prepare accordingly. Yeah. And I think it's a thing that people don't do. And unfortunately, you need to sort of make your own mistakes sometimes to some extent. You just hope they're not existential. You hope it's you hope it's not a foundation mistake that you find 3 years later, or like an electrical mistake that you find a millisecond later
when your house burns down.
Yeah. You hope it's like a non-leak based insulation problem that can we got to cut out a wall, but which I of course have made of all of these mistakes, but
yeah, I mean, sometimes you got to go through the pain of learning, and from our role is to shorten the time. Like if I can get somebody to understand the lesson quickly, then you only got to do it once. But sometimes people demand that they do this to themselves over and over and over. I'm like, dude, just take the lesson. Like, what did you learn? If you didn't learn anything, it was just a waste of time and money that you threw out the door. That's totally cool if that's what you want, but we could evaluate the lesson. So, Joe, what's the next big thing?
Like you talked about the engineer thing.
Yeah.
That's I mean, in Silicon Valley, famously, right? It's the fail fast.
Yeah.
Fail fast, move on. Like don't string this thing out. Like maybe you'll get another shot if you have a good idea. Learn something, explain to investors what you learned, how you're going to do it better, and go on. Don't try to just keep, running this, throwing bad, good time after bad,
Right. Jobs said, if you haven't shipped it, you don't have anything. And I'm like, because we have some guys working on product, I'm like, just frickin' do it. Like you can't learn there. A, you can't think your way to a perfect process, and B, until you do it, you don't get any feedback. So you're just wasting time, and knock it off.
That's one of my favorite things. If we're doing sort of the contractor analogy, what I say is like if maybe somebody needs a great big house built, I'm like, great. Well, we're happy to do it, but I really wouldn't mind if we're in charge of just doing if we're just in charge of like doing your driveway and putting up the outer fencing to start. Let's make sure that let's make sure that we understand each other. We've got the thing, and you can start getting those reps and figuring out how these things are going. Because there's nothing more annoying than like talking about something large for a long time and it doesn't happen. Let's get in there and do it. Let's start small, do a thing. And I'm lucky because that's how our industry works. There's no 1/100 size tiny house project that you would do as a prep to build the big house, right?
Right.
We're fortunate.
Part of it.
Yeah, we can write one article for somebody. You know what I mean? We can design one thing. We can do one one-off video project before embarking on the, long video podcast project or whatever it is.
Sure.
It's really nice to be able to sort of like take those small versions of it and learn and fast. Like, and the hope is even when they're big, you can like the process learnings you get, you can sort of apply, to the next one.
What's the next big thing for you, Joe, for UNN2 Comms? It's working on now.
So the big thing I've found lately is that there's a lot of people that are sort of, they hang their shingle out, right? It's maybe somebody who works in-house at an agency or in-house at a firm company, and now they're starting to do their own thing. What I found is like because of the nature of the work we do, which much more less like we do strategic work, but we really started with like implementational ops, scalable mistake prevention kind of stuff. So we built a lot of infrastructure, time tracking software, all these different things that like we had. And I realized that I had a lot of people that I knew who had none of that infrastructure. They were going out like, I'm going to be a consultant. The firm I used to work for, I have a 6-month, contract. It's half my old pay. So I've got 6 months to figure it out. And I say, so more and more, I've been trying to bring these people in-house because I have the infrastructure. I have the ability to, so we can start working where, it's hard being a solo operator. You have to say no because you're too busy right now, but you don't know what the next thing is going to be when you finish it.
Right.
There's a real economy of scale. And this actually is very much like a contracting business where I'm sort of like, this is the best roofer in the biz. Like I can just line stuff up for you. Let's get you in the system. Let's do this thing. And then like you can start. And hey, by the way, do you want to be overseeing 3 projects at once instead of running one? That's an option here. Like let's codify your processes. Let's train up one of my hyper good process people to be your junior. And they can sort of run things in the background while you go try to get another gig. But taking these folks who, they want that sweet spot. They want a little more freedom and flexibility than being in the place that they were in, but they also want some level of a safety net and infrastructure. So that's been a great one. We brought in some like phenomenal people, an old financial world editor of mine, Kip McDaniel, in this institutional investor. He runs like a ton of phenomenal sort of asset management content guy. He runs his own thing. He brings his people in. He uses our folks. So we've started to have more and more of these people who really are tapping into our infrastructure. And then after 3 to 6 months, you realize they're basically running a division of the company that is like that sweet spot between, having come in-house to us and them running their own thing and kind of making them profit shared partners. So this has been my thing for the last year or so, is getting just phenomenal talent and figuring out the way that, it works for them, that they can join in-house with whatever, because they're not in-house for a reason. They left somewhere.
Even that is similar to contractors today. Like the contractors that are growth oriented, they build stuff. Well, they got a tile guy that they sub to, but they could keep their tile guy busy, right? So let's bring the tile guy in and let him create the tiling division. And the industry, and maybe, like you set up when you started thinking about leveraging people collectively, the remodeling industry is a lot of people who think I'm the only way to do it, but there's 150,000 remodeling companies. It seems like just in our world, there's a ton of people that do it. Don't delude yourself. Almost everything that people do is not, landing jets on a aircraft carrier. It's something somebody else does. So take advantage of the expertise that's out there, and do it in an effective way. Like you're like the editor agglomerating high level skills so that people have access to more because they have access to you.
That's just it. The efficiency of lining up, and again, like you talked about, like understanding all of the like discrete operational things that need to happen, and how and the ways in which they're not discrete, and whether they all relate to each other, and sort of ironing out those frictions. And sometimes that means in-housing a bunch of stuff. Sometimes that means keeping certain things as outsourced, subbed out to people. And then what I think it usually is, and this is, I think, to me, this is the growth recipe, is knowing that you're gonna need both. and not being, like not being inflexible in your thinking, like knowing sort of like a mathy term, like heuristic confusion, it's sort of like batting average, is a good way to like understand, like, is it a winning player or not? But it's not the perfect thing. You
Right.
worry too much about one statistic and you're missing other parts of the pie. But understanding that of like knowing that sometimes you need to do something, outsource, sometimes you need to insource the thing, sometimes you need to do it yourself, sometimes you need to like have these people, and really understanding at its core, like what's the core driver here, the day to day, what does that look like?
How do you make money?
Exactly right. How do you get the job to make money? My Boston Irish grandmother would say, who's he when he's at home? What does that fancy terminology actually mean? You know what I mean? In like the lived experience, what does that turn into? How does this thing work as that sort of thing? And I think that that's like it's fun talking about this because I sort of subconsciously make these analogies because I've done just enough sort of construction and to know how it works. But to sort of literalize it, it really is quite similar. We're talking about like these all these different operational, like infrastructural creatives, who like have to come together in weird ways. And there's a million models of it.
It's so parallel. Yeah,
it really is. Yeah, the agency world, the contracting world, these are kind of the same deals at that core driver sort of way.
Right.
I mean, and I think that that's a really that cross analogize is fun. I'm very glad we got to do it.
Yeah, that the creative side in the structure world is design and visualizing, 3D what things look like. It's a skill I could never do because I'm not a very visual thinker. But it's critical and it's part of the process and understanding where you're best. We just want our clients to make money in the easiest way possible, right? It's not easy, but the easiest way, the easiest path for them. And I think this work of thinking about how other businesses are parallel instead of different, can get them to think slightly differently about how they're accumulating their resources and assets to get stuff done. So I thought we might go a little long, so we're a little bit over. I want to say thanks. I appreciate your time. It's been it's super interesting from my side too, to kind of see the visualization and verbalization of what the parallels look like. So, Joe Flood, N2 Comms, appreciate your time today. Thanks for being on the show.